Oh, how I remember my first day on the job. My first job ever was at McDonald's, and on the first day, I got locked inside the freezer. I had to call the stores for them to let me back out. They asked me why wasn't I at work, and I told them I was. I was just inside the freezer about to die. Anyways, whatever your first job may be, put it in the comments below. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights for 3 of these horror stories. My first job. I've been on Reddit for a while now, and I'd figure I'd go ahead and post the story. To get this straight, I haven't thought about this for a very long time. I pushed it out of my mind, but there are nights like these where I just have to get it out. Anyways, I was 17 years old at the time, on the way to being 18 years old, and I landed my first job at a mail sorting place thanks to my neighbor. Back then, being paid $7.75 an hour at my age was the biggest, not to mention, all I had to do was fill out a few pieces of paper and I got the job. No interview either. They loved my neighbor, and the guy who hired me was really cool. I called him Dad. First day of work, I met a girl named Jennifer. She was at least several months pregnant, and basically took me through the entire flat, showed me how things worked, instructed me on how to sort and the best way to do it. It was really boring work, so she kept talking to me, and we hit it off pretty well. I was a borderline recluse. I think she kind of knew that, and I was raising children and around pregnant people all the time, so I was able to talk to her about my experiences and how I felt about doing that sort of stuff. We had another cool boss by the name of Jerome, and on my first day, we all piled in his car and he took me home. It was then I realized that I desperately needed a car or someone to pick me up from work because I was gonna work late hours as per the schedule. Yes, it was illegal for me to work those hours, but I digress. My birthday rolled around, and I was getting friendly and finally being open with most people there. I learned the ropes really well, even worked in departments that needed more help because I was usually done earlier than I needed. People actually took me to lunch and brought me things back. Sometimes I'd buy people stuff to eat when they were down on their luck. It was like a little family, but I didn't know how much. Jerome worked with his wife. I can't remember her name, but she was the sister of Jennifer, which in turn made Jennifer a sister-in-law to Jerome. Jerome's cousin soon started working there, and time again, he tried to get my number, knowing full well I was underage at the time. I resisted because he wasn't my type, and he was already married. I found him disgusting. But we were all pretty much a cool group of coworkers that hung out a lot. A few months passed on, and I turned 18 years old. Valentine's Day rolled around, and we all decided to go out for drinks. I wasn't much of a drinker, and I knew it was illegal, but I went anyways and had fun. Got drunk as hell, too. Jenny had her baby, and she was out on the prowl looking for a guy. So I found one that she actually was kindly to, and I exchanged numbers for them. We all danced, went to Denny's. They walked me to the door and made sure I was safe and sound. Possibly a week or two later, Jenny didn't show up to work. She wasn't answering her phone or returning phone calls or messages. It was like she dropped off the face of the earth. Jerome, her sister, his wife, and one of the managers, this is all what I heard, decided to go to her house and check on her. And when they did, they found her dead. She was laying on her bed, throat slit, the baby was strangled and dumped in the laundry bin. When we found out, everybody was heartbroken. It was bad. The police came in and questioned every single person. They pulled me to the side last and showed me a bunch of pictures, questioned me about the night we went out drinking, harassed me to the point of crying about the entire thing. I had to call my sister to pick me up from work because I could not handle it the rest of the day. Thanks to my sister and everyone else close to me who I talked to death about, word got around my high school that I set Jenny up with a murder. A week or so after the questioning, Jerome came to me to vent, which was highly unusual, saying that the guy I hooked her up with wanted to move in with her, etc., just basically getting angry about it all. I understood his anger because that was his sister-in-law, but I didn't know why he wanted to tell me about it. Then he asked if I had a ride home, and I really didn't. I was just going to walk, so I told him no. He said he'd take me home, and we'd talk more about it later. I didn't really think much about it. That night, work was ending, and everyone was filtering out, one by one. I got into the car with Jerome, but turns out his car wouldn't start, so he had to get a ride from another coworker, and all was well. A few days passed, and a few days after that, Dad came up to us and gathered us around and told us that Jerome was arrested for the murder of Jenny. Apparently, he slept with Jenny and had gotten her pregnant. She refused to have an abortion, deciding to keep the child, which would add to his two that he already had with his sister. She wanted to name him so she could get benefits, but he didn't agree with it at all. So he went to the car to leave, but then decided to come back and kill her and the baby. One of the workers there started to scream and yell at me for getting into the car with him, saying that he planned to kill her because she knew that he was the baby's father, and that he was going to kill me too because he thought I knew. I really didn't. It was all a total shock. Dad pulled me to the side and gave me a huge hug, and I was allowed to go back to work after a little break. Things pretty much went downhill after that. Jerome's cousin kept pleading his innocence while saying that he misses us and he did no wrong. His attorneys cooked up a defense saying that some guy in a black Suburban made him do it. It was just damn weird. I couldn't work there anymore. I got out of there fast. It pretty much fucked me up until this day. Anyways, that's how my first job went. I recently went to look up news articles for this story and I googled his name. He has a pen pal profile up now, and it made me sick to my stomach. Please forgive the way I told the story. I hadn't slept yet, and I doubt I will tonight. First job. About 10 years ago, I was 16 years old, and at my parents' insistence, I got my first job. It was at a pizza and sub place that had just added a creamery. I started out as a front counter girl, but quickly trained on all the different stations they had. They needed more help, so I got my best friend at the time to apply to the job as well, and she started working there as well. One of our managers, Steve, seemed to take a liking to us. He was probably in his late 30s or early 40s, and seemed pretty nice. He would ask us questions during our shifts about school and other stuff like that. It was never anything too personal, and often told us about his daughters. I think there were around 3 or 4 of them, ranging in age from about 4 years old to 16 years old. The oldest one, the 16-year-old, was living with another relative, though he never explained why. The others would come into the restaurant sometimes, and if I remember correctly, one of them had a birthday party there. After we had been working there for a couple months, he started calling us both into work to do tasks such as cleaning the chair legs in the dining room. He also had us stay really late one night because some money had gone missing and he thought it might have been thrown away. Looking back on the whole situation now, I see it was totally ridiculous because it was my first job and I was relatively naive. Soon, it started escalating even more than that. There was a Chinese restaurant nearby, and Steve would go and get us meals during our shifts. He would also bring us little trinkets like cheap earrings and stuff like that. He would offer to buy us cigarettes and alcohol, and also offer to give us rides home, since neither of us had cars at the time. He drove one of those big vans with no windows in the back, though we never took him up on any of his offers. One day, we walk into work and another manager tells us that Steve has been fired. When we asked why, she showed us a flyer that she said someone had brought in after eating in the restaurant the week before. It was a sex offender flyer. Apparently, when his oldest daughter was a bit younger, she had her friend spend the night. He brought them both to his bed and raped them. Her friend told his parents, and Steve was arrested. Since our restaurant was near a school, he was not supposed to be working there at all. He also wasn't supposed to be living at his house with his daughters. He had taken a liking to me and my friend, and there's no telling what would have happened if we had accepted a ride from him. My first babysitting gig, and the worst fear I've ever felt. I grew up in a really safe city in the Midwest, in an even safer neighborhood, sort of set back in the woods, and separated from the main part of town. I haven't had a lot of creepy encounters in my short life, knock on wood, so this is pretty much the most afraid I've ever been. I was 11 years old at the time and had just passed the CPR Babysitting Essentials course at my recreation center. My neighborhood at the time was very close-knit. All of the kids on my street played together, and because of my two younger brothers, I would soon become the automatic babysitter for the 3 families we lived closest to. I look after my brothers for short amounts of time, but this was my first job as a real babysitter, watching the 2 grade school age kids who lived across the street. They were family friends. The parents had promised they'd be home by 11 p.m. at night, and I knew that my parents were home and ready to step in if I needed anything. So I was a little nervous, but felt like I had everything under my control. The kids were a novice babysitter's dream, actually. They've been trained that they are only allowed to choose 1 treat each before bed, and actually refused my offer to let them finish the show we were watching because it was their bedtime, and they still needed to brush their teeth first. I mean, it was amazing. I was floored, but it made my job super easy, so I guess whatever. I tucked them in and headed back downstairs to watch some TV until their parents returned. The mom is an interior designer, so their house is spacious and absolutely freaking beautiful. Their living room is at the back of the house, with floor-to-ceiling windows and great views of the woods in their backyard. The couch is set up with its back to those windows, and I was watching TV with their elderly white lab, Alex. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something large and light-colored brush past the window behind me. I thought it might just have been a deer, but I was 11 and alone, and I did have a overactive imagination. So eventually, I began to feel pretty uneasy and pretty on edge. The parents weren't due to be back for another 2 hours, at least, so I walked into the kitchen to call my mom and dad for reassurance. Alex followed. Their kitchen faces the living room, with the house phone on the counter of it. This was a time before cell phones happened. Standing at the counter dialing my parents, I actually had a clear view through the broad archway into the living room and out those enormous windows into the backyard. Alex laid down at my feet as I stood next to the counter and told my mom that I thought I'd seen something out the window. Hearing her voice was as comforting and as reassuring as I thought it would be, so I told her that no, I did not need Dad to come over, and that yes, I'd call her if I needed anything at all, whatever that may be. I hung up the phone and sat down on the floor to rub Alex's ears and belly for a few minutes, still kind of wary of the living room. I hadn't been there too long before I caught a glimpse of something odd outside those giant windows. I looked harder, past the glare of the TV, and noticed a tiny light bobbing around in the woods. Probably just a neighbor, I thought. But as I watched, the light seemed to be moving in what was undeniably my direction towards me. My whole body froze, and I stared as the light got closer and closer to the living room windows. And at some point, I realized with complete and paralyzing horror that the light had grown large enough that the source had to be right outside the house. The beam swung from one side of the living room to the other side and then settled directly on my face. I don't even think I squinted in the bright light as it shone through the window into my eyes. I was too startled. Alex snoozed on, placid in his old age, and entirely unaware that my heart had pretty much stopped beating. The light moved again, this time swinging away to illuminate a face from underneath. I saw dark, hollow eye sockets and the glowing curves of someone's cheek, but the face's details were lost in the harsh angle of the flashlight's beam. At this point, I was trying with all my might to scream, or to move my fingers enough to dial 911 for the police, or to move out of view of the window, just anything. Literally anything would have been better than sitting there with my mouth wide open and tears in my eyes like a stuffed turkey. But I never felt this kind of icy terror before in my whole entire life, and was completely immobilized by it. Everything felt like it was moving in slow motion, and I was totally powerless. The light swung around to point at me, then quickly moved back underneath the horrible face outside. It repeated this pattern once or twice, and then it suddenly disappeared. The flashlight had been turned off, and for whatever reason, that was enough to finally let me move again. I quickly stood and hit dial, about to call 911, as I mentally debated whether to hole up the master bedroom with the children, or just grab them and try to run out the front door to my parents' house. The recreations class had not prepared me for this. Before I even got as far as the foyer and the first one, though, I heard a loud boom and felt my gut leap into my throat as I realized that I'd remembered close the main garage doors and locked the door from the garage to the laundry room, but couldn't remember locking the man door from the garage to their backyard. I almost dropped the phone as someone began pounding on the interior door. Through the pounding, though, I could hear a voice. A really, really fucking familiar voice. Hey! Hey! It's Dad! Let me in! I stumbled over completely numb and unlocked the door. My dad could hardly stand up. He was laughing so hard. Apparently, my mom had sent him over anyways to check on me and make sure there was nothing to be afraid of. He'd done a quick sweep of the woods and backyard with a flashlight, under the assumption that Mom had mentioned that he'd be coming over. He saw me through the window and attempted to show me it was him by pointing at me, and then shining the light on his face under his frickin' face. He was completely unaware that the shadows made it impossible to tell who the hell he was. I guess until he saw the color drain from my face and realized he'd just given me the scare of my life. He thought it was pretty funny too. I didn't really agree. I know that the ending kind of makes the story inappropriate for Let's Not Me, but up until I heard my dad's voice, I really thought I was about to get all kinds of murdered that night.